1 week season.
1 week season, fam, La Familia. Welcome back. Week 11, FanDuel Labs. I am your host, Mike Johnson, M Johnson 86. Excited to be with you guys this week. We are over halfway through the NFL season, the regular season at least already. Pretty crazy to think about how quickly things go and how quickly things change. We are headed into a bye week, but we've got a very interesting slate this week with, we've got one more game. We've got 11 games this week, but we are still there isn't really a game that pops off and stands out as like clearly the two premium teams or high profile teams facing each other. So makes for an interesting week for building, but we saw scoring take off a little bit in week 10, so maybe a sign of things to come for the second half of the year. With that, we're going to bring in Maximus. Welcome back. How we doing?
Welcome back. Hola. Had an abortion of a week last week. When teams get blown out, there's the saying, just throw the tape away and move on to the next week. And that's what I'll do.
Yeah, I mean, it's the nature of the beast, right? Like you're going to have good weeks and bad weeks in this. Like nobody just smashes every single week, especially in football. JM talked about it in his winner circle pod actually this week. Just like chaos theory and how there's just so many random, unpredictable variables with football. That we could do the best we can, but ultimately, you can't account for, predict, so many things that are going to happen on an NFL field. That's why the things that are more predictable, you want to lean more into those things, and then try to find some spots where there's just a lot of certainty being given to certain roles or certain matchups or this defense, the perception of a defense being bad or good, sometimes in a 1 week sample, plug for the 1 week season brand there. But in a 1 week sample, things can break differently. So kind of being able to meld those two ideas, is kind of what it comes down to. But to your point, you've just got to, that's why we talk about your contest selection, the contest you play. And I just think that anyone who's doing this consistently, thinking deeply about the contest selection you want to play, what you're comfortable with, what your bankroll is going to be, so you can go through some swings, because if you're playing tournaments, there's no way around it. You're going to have some good swings and some bad swings. And, depending on who you are and how things break, sometimes those swings can be longer one way, or more severe one way or the other. But just is what it is. So sorry to hear you had a bad week, but let's, hopefully that was a little pep talk for you. And you're able to just move on to week 11 and smash this week.
Oh, yeah, you could say I was due. I was on a 9-week streak. That streak is done in this particular tournament that we've been covering every week with at least one team placing out of the 5. Caveat, though, I actually wasn't able to get 5 teams in this week because there's less entries in this tournament. Usually I kind of build my last 1 or 2 and Sunday morning, and I had already woken up and it was already filled. So I only had 3 teams in that particular contest. But I just dudded overall in all of my contests this week. And yeah, to your point, it happens. It's just the nature of the beast. I was probably due for that at some point, again, actually, it makes me more excited and hungry for this week on the flip side, because I kind of like, at least in my own preparation so far, I kind of I'm already feeling a little more clarity than maybe I did last week. Although last week I did get, again, it's another, you get game environments right, but if you don't have the right players in those environments, that also can lead to failure on top of just, not really having a center of gravity. I feel this week so far, as we're about to cover, I feel better. So
Nice. A week away from Thanksgiving, Maximus already hungry. He's ready to eat. All right. Yeah, he's like Zeke back in the day.
Zeke.
All right, so we'll pull up. Without further ado, we'll go to FanDuel. Just a quick recap. Anyone new? Maximus is building every week. He puts 5 entries in the FanDuel 25K Sunday NFL touchdown. A little bit smaller tournament than some of the big lotteries that maybe are more popular, but the structure is really good. Just over 10% of the prize pool to first place. So it isn't so top heavy. You got a nice, structure. The top 10, even, $400 for 10th place, which is over 10% of the first place prize pool. Which again, it just makes it so if you do have a really good lineup, you get paid off, on a little bit more. There's a little bit less variance or wild swings to the payouts there. So that's a positive. And you've got over a quarter of the, or just under a quarter of the field getting paid. So really good structure there. Maximus, why don't you take it away? Take the people through your lineup for this week, your one lineup that we're talking about today, and your thought process when you were building it.
By the way, kudos to you for bringing that up, the structure of that tournament a little more detailed this week. It really is a good setup in terms of most tournaments you're going to come across on either site. And then I apologize. I'm probably going to be looking at my screen at other stuff I have up more than I usually do, but just to point out individual team totals and game totals. But yeah, so we haven't done a CJ Stroud team this year yet. Obviously going to be, I'm assuming, popular and chalky, the game and these teams this week, especially with prices considered, probably on both sides, but definitely on FanDuel. I did an interesting exercise I had not done because, as a reminder, $60,000 is the salary on FanDuel as opposed to $50,000 on DraftKings. And I was kind of putting together just quarterback shells with double stacking and run backs and what the total price was on those as opposed to what you would have left in salary remaining. And even that metric, Stroud is, very affordable to have a well-balanced team for the rest of your team, either correlated or non-correlated. So I have CJ Stroud in this case with Singletary and Tank Dell with a Trey McBride run back. So a couple notes on that. That equates to $27,400 in salary for that block of 4 players. You got more than half of your remaining salary left over for a balanced team, 5 more spots to fill. It is the highest game total on the slate, at least currently. Trey McBride, again, very chalky. He will continue to be. He's probably been one of the few chalky players that has dramatically helped me out each week that I've played him, which I can't say for some of my other chalky ones. But and again, he's in a pristine matchup. Houston's one of the worst teams against the tight end position this year. And then Singletary, I'm never the biggest fan of Singletary, but he did have a big week last week, and he is playing a team who's very bad against pass catching running backs. One other place, by the way, on the scroll, I know yourself and some of my other colleagues haven't really dove too much into it, but on the scroll, the workbook section that Majestic puts up, I've actually started really warming up to that just for reference. It's one of the many options on the scroll you guys can look to on the site. And it gives some really good breakdowns of defensive pass rate over expectation against opponents and the different positions, what teams have overall, and then broken down to slot, outside receiver, running back, rushing, passing. Gives some really good statistics, more of a sample size now that we're more than halfway through the season. But in any case, so Singletary, and the other thing is Stroud's going to be such a popular stack. My thinking is it's a different way to stack them that may not be as owned if you're doing MME as the straightaway Dell and Nico. In saying that, I love Nico coming back this week. Sure, I'll have him as well in some other teams. Then we have the proverbial Tony Pollard. I said last week I wasn't going to go back to him if he didn't break out against the Giants, but his price is about as low as you're ever going to see it, I think, unless he keeps failing, I guess. Playing the worst run defense in football, clear run funnel defense. Dallas has a 26.5 implied team total. I mean, again, it's a spot in theory he could eat and do really well. But in saying that, I have ways to kind of switch out that we'll briefly cover. I feel with a 30-point implied team total of the Dolphins, in my opinion, you're going to need a Dolphin. I plan to have a Dolphin on every team. I'll be very curious about the Akane news, if he's like a full go by kickoff time on Sunday with Mostert. But in this case, I have Jalen Waddle, and I have him skinny stacked with Devontae Adams. Now, you can make an argument with Adams. Jalen Ramsey's back, Xavier Howard. Maybe Miami gets back to like a shutdown corner setup, in which case on this team you could pivot to Josh Jacobs instead of Pollard and then kind of work the team around a little bit. But for this purpose, on the flip side, Miami scores early. They score often. They're at home. On the face of it, in my opinion, seems to be more of an Adams game, playing catch up and probably being down a lot of points. Also, you can have the Dolphin with no run back. That's completely viable too. The Raiders team total is only 16. And then we finish it out with the 49ers defense. For some reason, I love the Niners this week. I'm going to quote from the FanDuel Bible, which is the Mike Johnson FanDuel course. You look for defenses that play against quarterbacks that throw a lot and that are mistake prone. We have an East Coast team traveling across country, likes to throw the ball a lot. Looks like the 49ers kind of found themselves last week kind of crushing in Jacksonville. I think they carry momentum back home. And not saying the Bucs can't put up points, but I love the 49ers defense at 4,000 there. And then that left me with 7,000 left over on this particular team. And you could go Adam Thielen if you wanted to really correlate this team with Tony Pollard, also at 7,000. You could go Garrett Wilson if you wanted a late swap, two players with the Niners defense to maybe late swap. But I went with Aaron Jones here. The Chargers, it's pretty known you can run against them, and you can definitely catch against them as a running back. And Aaron Jones at home this week. Weather may be a little bit colder. I haven't looked at the weather report yet. Chargers, yet another team traveling across country. So I like Aaron Jones in that spot. But again, you could switch out to Thielen to make more correlation with this team, or you could go Garrett Wilson, who gets a lot of volume. So you have a couple players in the late window. Just some other kind of switch out options. One other one, and I'll throw it to you. If you wanted to take out Pollard, take out Devontae, you could put in Josh Jacobs. You could go down to the Jets defense in the 4 o'clock window. And then you can fit in Nico Collins. You can kind of make a stack that way with Stroud. But I'm curious to get your take as a coach, Mike, on we got another coaching personnel change this week in Buffalo. I'm curious if that's going to have a similar effect that happened with the Raiders with their coaching change, because Buffalo, they're at home. They're probably in a must-win game. They changed. Somebody was the scapegoat, I think, for the personnel change. And I'm curious how you feel, if that's going to be adverse or it's going to kind of be a rah-rah for the Bills on a side note. But that's the team throwing it back to you.
So, to answer that question first, that whole situation just is like kind of head scratching. I get that the Bills, they're 5-5. They've been a little bit disappointing, but I mean, their offense by most metrics is top 5 in the league. They're third in EPA, I believe, top 3 in points per drive. I mean, you look at some of the things. I mean, just the Monday night game in itself, like Ken Dorsey gets fired the day after the game. Well, I mean, there's one play that was an interception that it was going around on Twitter. There was like a photo of like Gabe Davis, and he's like reaching, and he has the ball's like right in his hands, and that's the still frame photo, and the caption. Somebody goes, "This ended up as an interception, and somehow it was Ken Dorsey's fault." And I mean, Allen had the one interception towards the end of the first half where it was just a terrible decision. Like, he just threw it right to the guy, led to 3 points for the Broncos. There was all the stuff, like the pass interference, like the at the end of the game, the end of that game. Did you watch the Monday night game?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the end of that game, like, it's 3rd and 14 or whatever at the 45, and McDermott calls a 0 blitz. He brings the house. And so Wilson just chucks it deep, and they get the pass interference because the guy's got no safety help. So he's, he panics and runs into Judy on the end of the thrown ball. What's that?
No safety over the top.
Yeah. So, it's just like a gimme, and that's a really tough position to put your guy in there with no help over the top. And then once it's thrown up there, like, it's impossible to track that ball. Especially, the way Wilson threw it, like, so like the call was just really questionable. And then the 12 men on the field at the end, like, that's not Ken Dorsey's fault that the defense and special team, like,
horrible.
They had just called a timeout. So they had 2 timeouts left after the pass interference. Denver tried to run the clock down. They kneeled it and tried to. So they kneeled or whatever once. Buffalo called their first timeout. They did it again. Buffalo called their second timeout. So now it's 3rd down with 25 seconds left or 20 seconds left, whatever it was. Denver had no timeouts, so they had to either kick the field goal then, or they had to run a play and rush their guys out. Well, you just called a timeout, Buffalo. If Denver puts their offense out there, exactly what is about to happen. So how do you not just have your special teams on the field for that play? They're not, so you don't have to substitute at all.
Yeah.
You just had there is no justification. What the F do you we're on YouTube. I don't want to get censored here. So, I mean, if it were just me and you, my language would be much stronger. But
absolutely.
How do you come out of that timeout and have anyone on the field that wouldn't be on the field for a field goal? You know exactly what is about to happen. There's a 0% chance that the Broncos are running the ball, that they're passing the ball. They are kneeling and running their special teams on the field. And if they try to pass it, that's a victory for you. That's good. So all of that stuff happens, and then you come out of it the next day and you fire the offensive coordinator for a top 5 offense in the league. Sorry, I'm getting off track.
I love this. I love this. All the great details that you just outlined.
But
it segues into my question. I'm very curious.
To your point, or to your question, if you're in Buffalo, if you're a coach on staff, if you're a player in that locker room, and you have a clue about football, because I mean, there's some players don't know that much about football. We hear it all the time, guys that don't know the overtime rules and shit like that. But if you have anybody who has a clue in there is okay, just lost a lot of respect for Sean McDermott, in my opinion, because he is scapegoating and putting stuff on people that it's not. And Ken Dorsey's not perfect, but also Warren Sharp on Twitter, he had a good thread and a good article that he put out this week, kind of detailing how 2 years ago when the Bills were in 2020, the Bills offense that's the year they really were gangbusters. And then they lost in the AFC Championship game, and they were really close. But then McDermott, he had let Dable cut it loose that year. And then at the end of it, because they lost, instead of saying, well, we were really close, let's keep going, let's get it. He's well, we got to change. We're going to have to, be more run based. And they've gradually become a little bit less aggressive, and it's mainly probably because McDermott is like kind of forcing it. But regardless, the whole thing, I don't know how it's going to play out for sure in Buffalo, but I know that my opinion of McDermott has changed in a not positive way.
JM has brought this up too about praising Allen for not running, for not going deep downfield. And it's like they're trying to condition him to be more conservative. And, but there's a lot of disadvantages to that based on just who he is, what's been most successful for them overall. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, this week will be really interesting. Like, he fired Dorsey. Does he force the new guy to run like a very, very balanced offense? Like, is that his, is this McDermott mid-season going like what Mike McCarthy, talked about like back in May about, we're going to pound the run. Kudos to McCarthy, by the way, for figuring it out and cutting Dak loose. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But back to your lineup. I like the Stroud, Singletary, Dell. I like that build. So first of all, you talked about Stroud. Like, I really don't care about ownership for quarterbacks that much. So I don't worry too much about that. I do like so you've got that around that game, you've got Stroud, Singletary, Dell, and McBride. So with that 4-player core, I like the quarterback, running back together. I think that's super underutilized. Singletary will probably be one of the he'll be top 3, if not the top highest owned running back this week.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, at his price and with Pierce probably still out.
Pierce.
And then the matchup, everyone sees that 30th defense. I think playing them together is interesting, and I like the big, that group of players together. The one thing, as you were talking about it, is that I think I might, if I was going to build this roster, I might even go Kyler instead of Stroud.
Absolutely.
Just because
I had a build with Kyler as well.
Yeah,
I was really close. He's so easy to stack with Brown and McBride. And you could overstack this game with Murray too and just put a couple different Texans pieces. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, so I just think, and I think it's fine as is with Stroud, Singletary. Basically, when you play the quarterback and the running back, everyone worries so much about like, oh, are they, do they take away from each other? But really what you're just betting on is you're betting on 4 guys. You're like 4 touchdowns from the team, and if they overlap, if it happens to be a running back receiving touchdown, then it is what it is. But really it doesn't have to be that. Like, you just want the team to score a lot of points. So that, sometimes I think people are afraid to play them together. But I think it's much more viable. You're just betting on the overall team outcome. And then Dell becomes a part of that attached to Stroud. And then you've got the McBride bring back. So that's where my thought process somewhat is like, if you're going to do that, you could move to Kyler, who might run a little bit more than Stroud usually does. He looked like he had a couple plays late in that game last week where he looked like vintage Kyler. He did get subbed out for the tush push for Clayton Tune last week, so that was frustrating. But yeah, I think just in general, like, that build, becomes unique regardless of what the individual player ownerships might be. When you get 4 players from that team, and especially when if you do the running back opposite it, just because even if you went with Kyler, there's not a lot of people who are going to play Singletary and Dell together. So, but from the same standpoint as the quarterback and running back can do well together, the receiver fits in that as well. I like the Las Vegas, Miami, the idea there. It'll be really interesting because the 2 games since Josh McDaniels got fired, Devontae Adams, he had 7 targets against the Giants, 4 catches for 34 yards. That's the game where Daniel Jones tore his ACL. There wasn't much going on. They didn't have to do much really. And then last week, Adams had 13 targets, 6 catches for 86 yards against the Jets. They have Sauce Gardner. That's not like an easy matchup. So when you bring up this matchup and it's in Miami, like if it's very feasible he gets 13 to 15 targets, and with that low team total, I don't think he'll be very popular. So that's where I don't worry too much individually about ownership. I just like to make sure I have a couple spots on my roster that are unique. And I think that Adams will be fairly low owned for being like a guy who can very easily, have 100. If he had 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, even in a game where the Raiders get boat raced, that wouldn't be shocking to me. So yeah, I think a lot of good things with the roster. Pollard is an interesting one, kind of just a DFS social experiment with the psychology of do you stick with it? Do people like he's got the elite running game matchup, right? The Panthers have been, I don't know why it doesn't list them, but they've been near the bottom of the league in run defense this year. And then, you brought up Aaron Jones. I mean, we saw Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery have that massive game. Obviously, the Packers are not the same offense, but, it just shows that, running back production is there to be had. And if it's a close game, I think Jones is going to be leaned on heavily. And if the Chargers are able to get out ahead and the Packers have to pass more, I think, they're probably going to have to involve Jones in some way. So, either way, I think this is a really well-built roster. You've got a good core stack with that Houston, Arizona. I do think, you brought up the Miami, Las Vegas situation. So I do think there's a good chance that a Miami player ends up optimal, but I also think this week, especially, a lot depends on what happens with Achan. Is he active? What do we get news out of him? Because we have, Tyreek Hill is priced at $9,800. Achan and Mostert are both around 8,000. Waddle's 7,100. So they could score 5 touchdowns, and if they're spread out, everybody could have a solid game, but nobody is a have to have. But either way, even in that situation, nobody's really hurting you, I guess. So, I think it's fine either way. A lot of times people get too in the weeds on that, but I think it's just having a plan, which you do. You want to have a Dolphin on every roster. That's your plan. Go with it. If you were building, I think the other way to go about that is if you're going to build 5 lineups, maybe build 2 with one specific guy, 2 or 3 with one specific guy, and just fade everyone else. And you're just going to hope that that's the guy that hits. But whatever it is, you just want to have a plan on exactly how you're trying to attack it. And again, like we talked about at the start, there's always things that we can't account for, and that are, all we can do is try to make the best decisions we can before the contest start.
And that's a good segue. Have a plan. I'd like to segue that briefly into late swap, because that's always something I like to make mention or have thoughts on ahead of time, maybe what your potential late swap options could be? A couple real quick. Devontae Adams. Again, if you think Jalen Ramsey coming back, Xavier Howard, Miami gets tough again on the backside. You can and on the flip side, you don't necessarily need to bring back for a Miami player to have a ceiling. You could take Devontae Adams out, one of the options. You could put in Puka Nacua, who gets Stafford back most likely this week. And then if you swap out the Niners defense for the Jets defense, you have great options in that flex spot of Brandon Ayuk for the Niners and players in that price range. And it's another, if you want 2 or 3 for late swap on certain teams, because I always love the possibilities of late swap based on how your 1 o'clock story is doing. And so, always have late swap in mind too. I think especially in small field. But these are some other ways you could put Nacua in, you could put the Jets in. I think you can get to, or maybe not. I thought you can get to Brandon Ayuk that way, but
Must have had to do something else too.
Maybe scroll down a little bit. I mean, I had somebody else in mind. Oh, maybe it was Debo.
It was Jacobs.
Yeah. Instead of Adams, you could plug in Jacobs there. You could also plug in Brian Robinson, Breece Hall, Debo Samuel. Those would be your late swap partners, along with the Jets defense, maybe. So, so a lot of places you can go this week based on the pricing. If you're thinking about late swap as part of your process, which you should be, I think, in my opinion. Cool stuff to think ahead of time on, especially if you're making multiple teams. There's a contest we don't cover that I think I may dip my toe in this week on FanDuel. It's FanDuel show. It's 25 teams. It's a $25,000 first place. 25 entries, $3 a team. Usually it's about 29, 30,000 entries in it. So obviously MME, but it's another 25% of the field gets paid, and it's a little more top heavy, obviously, than contests like this, but just a fun way. If you're feeling comfortable about expanding the core, expanding with this core and bringing late swap and other scenarios into play, and you feel you need to build more teams, that may be a fun tournament I try out this week and see what happens with that. But
yeah, I think that's all really good stuff. I think, there's, again, comes back to having a plan, figuring out what you want to do before Sunday morning, and going with it. I love it. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot else to add. I think it's like I talked about at the start. I think it's an interesting week. We have such a, there aren't any games. Once again, no games over a total of like 48, I believe.
Honorable mention, Detroit, Chicago. Another game I'm looking to possibly build for. I think they're at 48 or 48 and a half. Should be interesting how Fields is coming back from a thumb injury, but definitely a game I got kind of targeted as well. An honorable mention, to the team that we talked about. But go ahead.
Yeah. So I think, I just think keeping all the context of the slate in mind and building from there, and again, we're going to have some good weeks and some bad weeks, but you gotta take them as you come. That's the nature of the beast here. So, definitely, as always, appreciate and enjoy the time with you, Maximus.
My pleasure.
Looking forward to, we'll have to talk and figure out, next week might be tough with Thanksgiving and stuff. So,
right.
We'll talk off air. Hopefully, for everyone, we're able to get one together. If not, we'll see you in week 13. But one way or another, we will see you soon. Hopefully, celebrating some binks. So, best of luck to everyone. We will see you on Twitter and in Discord, and we will see you at the top of the leaderboards.
1 week season.